All right, so as you can see, the weather is not really the best today. It is kind of cloudy, and I'm not really sure if the sun will ever come out today, but I have to test this because I'm super curious. Which one of these cameras delivers the widest dynamic range performance when shooting with their log profiles? So D-Log M on the Pocket 3, D-Log on the Pocket 4, and D-Log 2 on the brand new DJI Pocket 4P. On paper, the Pocket 4P should definitely win because according to DJI, this camera should deliver up to 17 stops of dynamic range, which is a super bold claim. That's more or less the same performance as a Cinema RE Alexa camera. So let's test this out today in real world without any test charts and whatnot, and hopefully we'll be able to see the difference. Personally, I can definitely see the dynamic range difference between the Pocket 4 with D-Log and the Pocket 3 with D-Log M. There is definitely a difference when color grading and editing in post-production. So hopefully I'll be able to see more or less the same difference between D-Log 2 on the Pocket 4P and D-Log on the Pocket 4. And if that's the case, that would be a substantial upgrade. All right, so I'm gonna start with automatic exposure settings first, which in the Pocket 4P is not fully automatic because the ISO is set manually. You cannot use auto ISO with D-Log 2, and then the camera basically uses the shutter to adjust the exposure for you. On the Pocket 4 though, when using D-Log, you can set the ISO range to 400 to 6400, so the camera can use also the ISO to basically adjust the exposure. And then on the Pocket 3, you have the range from like 50 to 3200, I believe. That's basically the settings that I'm using right now. And also I'm going to use the official DJI LUT to convert the log profiles of these cameras to Rec. 709, but also later on I'm going to expose the footage on the Pocket 4 and the Pocket 4P slightly brighter than necessary by about, I would say, 1.7 stops, and then bring down the exposure in post-production just to show you how much cleaner the shadows get when you expose brighter than necessary with these profiles, and then bring down the exposure in post-production. Anyhow, let's do a couple of tests as best as I can. This is going to be a pretty good one. So I'm close to the shadows. Behind me are the highlights, and if the Pocket 4P does have a wider dynamic range performance, it should be definitely noticeable with this shot. Yeah, I can definitely see a bit more shadow detail on the Pocket 4P, just a little bit, but maybe it's the algorithm of the camera and exposing a bit differently. That could be also the case. Now the Pocket 4P just exposes brighter than the Pocket 4. So I'm not really sure if you do get a wider dynamic range, but let's see. Now let's just walk around like this. Holding these cameras, by the way, is super heavy, super tough. I'm definitely brighter on the Pocket 4P. Also, you can kind of look at the stabilization performance between these cameras. From my experience, the Pocket 3 delivers the best stabilization performance when doing like selfie vlogging like this. Here is another test for you guys. On which camera you can see more detail on me and also on the background at the same time. Let me know down below. All right, so now I am overexposing by 1.7 stops on the Pocket 4 and the Pocket 4P. The image definitely looks significantly brighter, and it looks like I am blowing out the highlights in here because I'm overexposing, but from my experience, at least, D-Log on the Pocket 4 is super flexible, so I can bring down the exposure and make it look normal without really losing any highlight information while, you know, getting significantly cleaner shadow results, basically reducing, you know, the noise. All right, now one of you guys said on my last video that some other YouTuber said that if you use ISO 1600 on the Pocket 4P, you get the best dynamic range performance. Basically, that's the base ISO of the Pocket 4P. So let's put it to the test. Right now I'm using it on the Pocket 4P. So let's see if that's true or not. If you do get better dynamic range at ISO 1600, and hopefully not with a lot of noise increase in the shadows. Honestly, to my eyes, it looks more or less the same, at least by looking at the displays of these cameras. And now I brought down the ISO to 100 on the Pocket 4P, just to compare ISO 100 to 1600 and see which one works better. All right, and now let's do some manual exposure tests just to keep it as accurate as possible, if you will. And I exposed for my skin. This should definitely, stress out the dynamic range performance of these cameras, because as you can see, the background behind me is pretty much blown out. So hopefully we're able to tell which camera holds more details in the shadows and also in the highlights at the same time. By looking at the screens, it looks very similar between the Pocket 4P and the Pocket 4. Pretty much identical, honestly, except for the skin tone colors. Like on the Pocket 4P, my skin looks a bit more yellow, and then on the Pocket 4, it looks more red. All right, so right now I switched to ISO 1600 to see if it delivers a wider dynamic range performance. Honestly, it looks the same to me by looking at the screen, but obviously I'll have to look at the footage in post-production. And if ISO 1600 is the base ISO of D-Log 2 on the Pocket 4P, hopefully DJI will mention that somewhere instead of us like guessing what is the best ISO to use to get the widest dynamic range performance from this camera. All right, here is another test for you guys, just to make it as accurate as possible to test the dynamic range performance between these cameras. Basically have a light in here I exposed for my skin with all of these cameras, and just look at the background in here to determine which camera basically, preserves the information in there the best. From what I could see on the screen, the Pocket 4P looks honestly the best. I can see more detail right here in the middle, right, compared to the Pocket 4 and especially the Pocket 3. I know this is not the most accurate test, but this is the best I could come up with basically. And I'm still using the ISO 100 on the Pocket 4P, by the way, so I'm gonna switch to ISO 1600 to see if it's any better or not. All right, and now I switched to ISO 1600 on the Pocket 4P just to see if it delivers better dynamic range performance. And by the way, I have also a light in here shining directly at the cameras just to also show you kind of the flare performance of these cameras. All right, the sun finally came out. Here is another test for you guys. I am filming myself. I'm in the shadow area of this location. Behind me are strong highlights. So let's see which camera retains the most amount of information in the shadows and also in the highlights at the same time. All right, so I just finished reviewing all of the footage on my computer, and I must say I'm pretty impressed with the dynamic range performance of the DJI Pocket 4P. It is definitely significantly better to what you get on the DJI Pocket 4 with D-Log, and especially to what you get with the D-Log M profile on the DJI Pocket 3. This was especially noticeable to me during the test I've done in my house with the balcony in the background. I just saw more information in the highlights and shadows with the DJI Pocket 4P compared to the other cameras. And also overall, the image on this camera looks more organic and natural to me compared to the other cameras. And also, I've done some ISO tests with this camera, ranging from ISO 100 to 3200 to see which ISO performs the best. And I would definitely avoid using ISO 100 and 3200. The reason I would avoid using ISO 100 is because the clipping point for the highlights is significantly lower than other ISO values. At ISO 200, the image opens up significantly more in the highlights by about, I would say, like 5 IRE. So if you want to get more information in the highlights, I would definitely use ISO 200 instead of 100. And then the other ISOs look more or less the same when it comes to like overall dynamic range performance. So I don't really think the base ISO of this camera is 1600. By the test that I've done, it seems like ISO 200 is the base ISO of this camera. But the reason I would avoid using ISO 3200 is because when going from 1600 to 3200, the noise increases substantially. So if you want to film in low light with this camera, I would definitely use ISO 1600 maximum to keep the image as clean as possible while getting the most amount of information into the camera possible at the same time. Now, another thing that I want to mention is that I noticed that the skin tones on this camera look slightly more yellow than on the Pocket 4, which I personally prefer more. But also at the same time, I had to use the Pocket 4 D-Log LUT on this camera because the D-Log 2 LUT is not really available yet. So maybe DJI has to release a proper LUT, which will give us like, you know, proper skin tones, if you will. But again, I kind of prefer my skin tones to be slightly more yellow or like orange than magenta and red, if you will. And also I noticed that the battery life on this camera is slightly worse than what you get on the Pocket 4 by about 10%. I would say I would get like 10% less battery compared to the Pocket 4. But also I noticed that the stabilization performance on this camera is even worse when it comes to like overall jitterness than the Pocket 4. I didn't really like the stabilization performance on the Pocket 4 because it is definitely worse than what you get on the Pocket 3 when doing like selfie vlogging and whatnot. And it seems like, to my eyes at least, the Pocket 4P is even worse than the Pocket 4. So again, maybe DJI has to release more firmware updates to make the stabilization performance slightly better. So anyhow, hopefully this video was informative and useful. I'm gonna make more videos to test this camera, but overall I'm really impressed with the D-Log 2 profile on this camera. It's definitely my favorite one between all of these Pocket cameras. Anyhow, thanks for watching. Let me know what you think down below, and I guess I'll see you in the next video. Bye bye.